The first sound Malik heard each morning was not the call of birds, nor the whisper of wind through trees. It was the rattling of chains. Iron links clinked against one another as bodies shifted in the dark, cramped slave quarters. The room smelled of sweat, rot, and despair. The air was heavy, suffocating, though even the night refused to give them rest. Malik's wrists burned where the shackles rubbed his skin raw. The sores never healed. Each movement sent a dull ache shooting through his bones. His body was no longer his own. It belonged to the overseers, to the master, to the men who commanded him with whips instead of words. A heavy fist banged on the wooden door. "Up, work begins." A voice barked in Khmer. Malik didn't need to understand the words anymore. The tone was enough. He rose slowly, careful not to wake the faint glimmer of hope that still tried to live in his chest. His back bent, his legs trembling, but he moved. To refuse meant death. To hesitate meant the lash. He had seen it happen too many times. Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the horizon in streaks of red and gold. But there was no beauty here, only another day of endless labor. Malik and the others were herded like cattle toward the fields, chains clinking, overseers shouting. Some were beaten before they even took their first step. The fields stretched endlessly, a sea of mud and water where rice plants struggled to grow. The land was cruel, but not as cruel as the men who ruled it. Malik's master, a Khmer Rouge loyalist, watched from a distance, dressed in clean clothes, untouched by sweat or mud. His eyes never softened, not even for a moment. To him, Malik was less than an animal, something to use until broken, then discard, faster. "Chan," the overseer snarled. His whip cracked through the air. Malik bent low, digging into the mud with his bare hands, planting stalk after stalk of rice under the scorching sun. Sweat poured into his eyes, blinding him, but he dared not stop to wipe it away. By midday, his back screamed with pain. His stomach clawed at itself with hunger. But there was no pause, no mercy. Malik remembered his mother's voice, soft, strong, calling him "my lion." It had been years since he'd heard her. He clung to that memory like a dying man clings to air. Shane stalked through the rows, his boots splashing in the mud. He stopped in front of Malik, watching him work. A cruel smile tugged at his lips. "Look at him," Chan sneered, switching to broken English so the others would understand. "The black dog thinks he is strong." He jabbed the butt of his bamboo rod into Malik's ribs, hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. Malik gasped, but didn't cry out. Crying out only made it worse. "Work, dog. Work until your bones crack," Chan spat. Before moving on to torment another, Malik bent lower, his body shaking, but inside, a quiet fire flickered. They could chain his wrists, break his bones, starve his body, but they would not own his soul. He repeated those words silently, over and over as the day dragged on. "You will not break. You will not break." When the sun finally dipped behind the horizon, the slaves were marched back to their quarters. Some collapsed along the way, dragged by others who could still stand. Malik's body was numb, every muscle screaming, but his spirit whispered one truth. As long as he lived, there was still a chance. That night, lying on the hard dirt floor, surrounded by moans and coughs, Malik stared into the darkness. He thought of freedom not as something he would ever see, but as something worth imagining. His mother's voice, echoing in his memory, told him to endure, and so he endured. The next morning began with the same pounding on the door. The same guttural orders barked through the darkness. Malik's body had not recovered from yesterday's torment. His arms felt like lead, his ribs throbbed with every breath, and his stomach was a hollow pit of pain. But there was no time to linger on suffering. The overseers would not wait. The slaves shuffled into the fields once more, their bare feet sinking into the wet mud. The smell of stagnant water and sweat hung heavy in the air. Malik bent low, his hands trembling as he forced rice stalks into the earth. From the corner of his eye, he saw Chan, the overseer, moving like a predator among prey. Chan was young, broad-shouldered, with eyes that gleamed with cruelty. He carried his whip loosely as though it were an extension of his arm, eager for flesh. Malik prayed Chan's attention would fall on someone else. But prayers rarely held power in this place. Stop. Chan barked suddenly, his voice cutting through the field. His eyes locked on Malik. Malik froze, his heart pounding. He had no idea what mistake he had made. Perhaps he had worked too slowly, or perhaps Chan simply wanted entertainment. It didn't matter. Stand, Chan ordered. Malik rose slowly, mud dripping from his hands. The other slaves kept their eyes down, afraid to be associated with him. The field went silent except for the buzzing of insects and the distant croak of frogs. You think you are strong? Chan sneered, switching into broken English again so Malik could not pretend not to understand. Black dog with muscles, yes. Show them how strong you are. The whip cracked through the air before Malik could brace himself. The first lash tore across his back, ripping skin, sending fire racing down his spine. He staggered but did not fall. The second blow came harder, and then the third. Each strike echoed in the silence of the field, punctuated by Malik's ragged breaths. He clenched his jaw, refusing to scream. Screaming would give Chan pleasure. Chan's grin widened. Good, strong dog. Let us see how long. The whip rained down again and again. Malik's vision blurred as blood ran down his back, mixing with the mud at his feet. His knees buckled, but he forced himself upright. Each time Chan struck, Malik whispered inside himself, I will not break. I will not give you the satisfaction. The slaves around him dared not move. But Malik caught glimpses of their faces as filled with pity, horror, and helplessness. Among them, Sophia's gaze lingered. The young Cambodian girl pressed her lips together, holding back tears, her small hands clenched into fists. Malik drew strength from that fleeting spark of compassion. Finally, Chan grew bored. He spat into the mud and shoved Malik back toward the rows of rice. Work, dog. Work with blood on your back, he jeered. Malik bent down again, every movement agony. His skin burned where the whip had torn it open, but he forced his hands back into the mud. Stalk after stalk he planted, each one a silent act of defiance. Hours later, when the sun dipped low and the overseers herded them back to the quarters, Malik collapsed onto the dirt floor. His back was a lattice of raw wounds, his shirt clinging wet with blood in the darkness. He felt a small hand press something cool to his lips. Sophia. She had stolen a gourd of water, risking her life to help him. Malik drank greedily, the water running down his chin. Don't die, Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. You must not die. Malik met her eyes in the dim light. For the first time in weeks, he felt something beyond pain, a flicker of human connection. It was enough to keep him breathing, enough to remind him that even here, even in chains, he was still a man. He lay back, his body broken, but his spirit whispering the same vow it always did. You will not break. You will not break. The days blurred together in an endless rhythm of pain, labor, and silence. But one torment grew heavier than the lash. Heavier even than the chains. Hunger. Food had always been scarce, but now the rations grew thinner still. A small bowl of watery rice broth was all Malik received for a day's worth of back-breaking work. The liquid barely coated his tongue, slipping down his throat without touching his stomach. It left him emptier than before, like a cruel joke. By the third day of reduced rations, Malik's body had begun to betray him. His ribs jutted sharply against his skin, his legs wobbled beneath him, and his hands shook so badly he could barely press the rice stalks into the mud. His vision swam with black spots when the sun climbed too high. Around him the other slaves withered too. Mothers tried to soothe their crying children with lullabies, but their breasts were dry, and the baby's cries turned into weak whimpers before fading into silence. Men who once had strong shoulders and broad backs now looked like skeletons draped in skin. Malik watched one of the younger boys stumble in the field, too weak to rise. An overseer struck him across the face with a bamboo rod and dragged him up by the arm, forcing him to continue. The boy's hollow eyes were vacant, as though he had already left his body behind. Hunger hollowed out more than their stomachs. It stole laughter, conversation, and even hope. The quarters grew quieter each night as energy drained from every soul. For Malik, hunger carried another cruelty: memory. Each gnawing ache in his belly reminded him of meals long gone of steaming bowls of stew his mother made, of roasted fish by the river, of the sweet taste of ripe mangoes under the sun. He could almost smell the spices, almost hear his family's voices. And then the vision would vanish, leaving only emptiness. One evening, as Malik sat slumped against the wall of the slave quarters, Sophia crouched beside him. She held something small in her palm, a scrap of cassava root, stolen from the overseer's waist. "Eat," she whispered. Glancing around to be sure no one saw, Malik's eyes filled with tears. The scrap was barely bigger than his thumb, hardly enough to quiet the roar of hunger, but it was everything. He hesitated. "You need it," he rasped, his voice cracked from thirst. Sophia shook her head fiercely. "You are strong. Stronger than me. If you die, we all lose something." Her words pierced him deeper than any whip. He accepted the scrap and chewed slowly, savoring the bitter taste as though it were a feast. His stomach cried out for more, but his heart felt something different: gratitude. And a strange guilt for taking food from someone weaker. That night, Malik lay awake, his body still trembling from hunger. Around him, he heard the faint breaths of the dying, the coughs that never ended, the groans of those who could no longer rise, the silence of those who never would again. Hunger was more than starvation. It was a weapon. It turned men against one another, made mothers despise their own children's cries, made even the strongest wish for death's release. The overseers knew this. They smiled when they watched slaves lick empty bowls, when they fought over crumbs, when their strength faded to nothing, but Malik whispered into the darkness, the words forming silently on his cracked lips: "I will not let hunger take me. Not today." The gnawing pain in his belly was unbearable, but within it lived a different kind of fire hunger, not just for food, but for freedom. The sun rose heavy and merciless that morning, baking the wet fields until steam rose from the mud like breath from an open wound. Malik's body trembled before he even left the slave quarters. Hunger had already hollowed him, but the whip had carved him raw, and his wounds refused to close. Every step was agony. By midday, his vision blurred. He swayed on his feet, the rice stalk in his hand slipping from his weak grip. The mud beneath him seemed to pull harder than usual, as if it longed to swallow him whole. Then, suddenly, his knees buckled. He fell forward into the muck, his face pressed into the filth. A shadow loomed over him. "Shand!" The overseer's laughter rang sharp and cruel. "Look at the black dog. Can't even stand." He grabbed a bamboo rod from another guard, testing its weight in his hand. "Let us see if broken bones make you work faster." The first strike landed across Malik's side with a sickening crack. Pain exploded through his ribs. He cried out this time, the sound torn from him before he could swallow it back. Chan struck again, harder, till Malik felt the world spin in flashes of white and red. The slaves around him froze, their eyes fixed on the mud, afraid even to breathe. But their silence was heavy, trembling with unspoken horror. Chan's boots slammed into Malik's chest, driving him deeper into the mud. "Get up," he roared. "Work, dog, or die here." Malik tried. He clawed at the mud with shaking hands, his breath ragged, his ribs screaming with every movement. But his body refused him. He collapsed again, coughing blood into the muck. Satisfied, Chan spat beside him. "Leave him. If he dies, he dies." The overseer strode away, his laughter still echoing. Two slaves dragged Malik back to the quarters that evening, his body limp between them. He could barely breathe. Every inhale felt like knives piercing his chest. He was dropped onto the dirt floor, abandoned to fate. The night was long. Malik lay unable to move, the darkness pressing down like a weight. Every breath came shallow, his broken ribs stabbing deeper with each rise and fall of his chest. He wondered if this was the end, if his spirit would finally be unchained in death. But then he felt gentle hands on him, Sophia. She crouched beside him, tears shining in her eyes. She had brought a cloth torn from her own garment and a small cup of water. She dipped the cloth, pressing it to his wounds, wiping away blood and mud. "You must live," she whispered. "If they kill you, they kill all of us. You show us how to keep breathing." Malik's lips trembled, but no words came. Instead, he closed his eyes and listened to her voice, soft, trembling, but filled with a strange strength. That night, pain carved through him, sharper than ever. His body was broken. His ribs would never heal properly. He could feel it in the way they ground against one another, in the way each breath burned. But something inside him refused to collapse. Lying in the dark, he realized something important. Though his body was shattered, his spirit remained whole. Chan could crack his bones, starve him, humiliate him, but there was one thing no whip could touch: his will. And so, through the agony, Malik whispered again the vow that had become his prayer: "You will not break. Not now. Not ever." The slave quarters were more than a place of rest. They were a graveyard of voices. Each night, when the overseers bolted the doors and darkness swallowed the room, silence fell like a shroud. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of fear. Malik lay on the dirt floor, his ribs still broken, his wounds stiff with dried blood. Every movement stabbed at him, but worse than the pain was the silence pressing in on all sides. He could hear breathing, faint and uneven, the cough of someone sick, the whimper of a child too weak to cry properly, but words were rare. Words could kill. The overseers listened. Everyone knew it. Spies were everywhere. A whisper in the night could lead to punishment in the morning. And so the slaves learned to bury their voices, to keep their thoughts locked deep inside. Malik had almost grown used to it when he felt someone shift closer. An older man, his face etched with lines like cracked stone, leaned in until his breath touched Malik's ear. "My name is Kosel," the man murmured, his voice hoarse. "Once I fought. Now I only breathe." Malik turned his head, surprised. Kosel's eyes gleamed faintly in the dark, filled with the weight of decades of suffering. "Why?" Malik whispered back, his throat dry. "Because fighting alone is death. And death helps no one," Kosel replied. He paused, then added, "But breathing, even in silence, is defiance. As long as we breathe, they have not won." The words struck Malik deep. He thought of his own vow, his own refusal to break. Perhaps Kosel understood. Perhaps, in this silence, they were not entirely alone. Later that night, Malik felt another presence near him. A woman's voice, soft but steady, spoke from the shadows. "My name is Malis. I had 3 children. 2 are gone. 1 remains." She hesitated, and in that pause, Malik heard the weight of her grief. "I cannot weep. If I weep, they will take her too, so I swallow my tears." Her voice faded back into silence, but Malik felt it linger inside him. This was what silence carried: unspoken stories, unbearable grief, and the faint thread of survival that tied them all together. He began to notice it more in the following days. The way slaves would exchange glances instead of words, the way a hand would brush another in passing, giving comfort without sound. The way Sophia sometimes looked at him, eyes filled with questions she dared not speak. Silence was both a weapon and a wound. It protected them from the overseers, but it also buried their humanity. Malik realized that if he gave in to silence completely, if he let it swallow him whole, he would die long before his body stopped breathing. One night, when the weight of silence grew unbearable, Malik broke it. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. "They can break our bones, starve our bodies, chain our hands, but they cannot chain the mind. Remember that?" No one answered. The silence returned, heavier than before. But Malik felt eyes on him in the dark, watching, listening, hoping. And in that moment, Malik knew something had shifted. His suffering was no longer his alone. It was shared, carried in silence, waiting for a time when silence would break into something louder, something dangerous. The air that morning was thick and heavy, as if even the sky had grown tired of watching the fields bleed men dry. Malik dragged himself into the mud with the others, his ribs still aching with every breath, his hunger gnawing louder than the buzzing of insects. He worked in silence, the whip always in the corner of his mind. But something felt different. The overseers moved with a strange tension, their eyes sharp, their voices sharper. Malik noticed how they pushed the slaves to gather in one place, forcing them to stop their labor. Confused whispers darted through the crowd. But no one dared to speak aloud. Chan strode into the center of the field, his whip coiled at his side, a cruel smile on his lips. Behind him, 2 guards dragged a boino older than 12 by the arms. The boy's eyes were wild with terror, his thin body trembling so violently it seemed he might collapse. "This one," Chan announced, his voice carrying over the hushed slaves, "is a thief." A murmur rippled through the group, quickly silenced by a crack of the whip in the air. "He stole food," Chan continued, "rice that belongs to the master. For this crime, there is only one punishment." The boy shook his head violently. "No, please, no. I was hungry, His words were cut short as Chan's hand struck him across the face, snapping his head to the side. Malik's stomach twisted. He knew the truth. The boy had stolen nothing. The accusation was a performance, a tool to remind them all of their place. Chan raised his bamboo rod high and brought it down on the boy's back. The sound was sickening, the boy's scream piercing the heavy air. Again and again the rod fell, till the boy's cries turned into broken sobs, and finally into silence. The slaves stood frozen, their faces blank masks, but their eyes betrayed them horror, rage, helplessness. Malik felt his own chest heave with fury. His broken ribs screamed, but his anger burned hotter than his pain. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms until blood dripped from his hands. When the boy's body lay still in the mud, Chan turned to the slaves. "This is what happens to dogs who think they can take what is not theirs. Remember this." He spat on the lifeless child, then barked for the slaves to return to work. Malik bent back into the mud, but his hands shook too violently to plant the rice. He forced his body to keep moving, to avoid the whip, but his mind was elsewhere. Rage pulsed through him, pounding in his ears, drowning out every sound except the echo of the boy's screams. That night, Malik could not sleep. He stared into the darkness of the quarters, his body trembling, his ribs aching with every shallow breath. He remembered the boy's hollow eyes, the sound of the rod breaking his small frame, the silence that followed, the silence. Always silence. Something inside Malik shifted that night. The vow he had whispered to himself to endure, to not break, changed. It grew teeth. Survival was no longer enough. He could not stay silent forever while children died for nothing. He thought of Kozel's words, "As long as we breathe, they have not won." And then of Sophia's, "If you die, we all lose something." Malik realized he had something left to give, his strength, though battered, his will, though scarred, his very life, if that was the cost. For the first time, Malik did not just whisper to himself. He leaned close to Kozel in the darkness and said, "One day, this will end. One day, we must make it end." Kozel's eyes glinted faintly in the dark. He said nothing, but Malik saw the faintest nod, and in that silent nod, rebellion was born. The days after the boy's execution were filled with a silence so heavy it threatened to crush them all. Every face in the fields wore the same mask, eyes cast down, mouths pressed shut, bodies moving like machines. The overseers prowled with sharper cruelty, eager to sniff out even the faintest spark of defiance. But in the shadows of the slave quarters, something had begun to stir. Malik felt it first as a tremor inside him, a restless energy that refused to be buried. The image of the boy's lifeless body haunted him, but instead of breaking him, it sharpened his rage. He began to notice the glances the way Kozel's. Eyes lingered on him in the dark, the way Sophia's hands trembled not with fear but with quiet determination. One night when the overseer's footsteps faded and only the chorus of crickets filled the air, Malik leaned close to Kozel. "We cannot keep breathing like this," he whispered. "Breathing is not enough. We must fight, or we will all die as ghosts." Kozel's face was worn, his spirit scarred by years of torment. He shook his head at first. "You don't understand. I tried. Long ago. They beat me until I forgot the sound of my own voice. Resistance means death. Malik's broken ribs throbbed as he shifted closer. Then let death find us standing, not crawling. The older man stared at him in the dark for a long time, then sighed. Perhaps you are young enough to still believe? But if you act, you must act carefully. Even whispers can kill. And so they whispered. The circle grew slowly. Sophia Cassell, Molly's, and 2 others. Their conversations were short, hidden in the rhythm of work or muffled beneath coughing fits in the quarters. They never spoke names, never said words like escape or rebellion. Instead, they spoke in fragments. When the moon is darkest, when the guards are drunk, when breath is no longer enough. Each whisper carried both hope and terror. Sophia's eyes lit when Malik spoke, but her voice trembled with fear. If they catch us, they will not just kill us. They will kill everyone, women, children, all of us. Malik nodded. He knew the cost. His body bore the proof. But each time he remembered the boy in the mud, the choice became clear. If silence means death anyway, then why not die with fire in the chest? The overseer seemed to sense the shift. Chan grew harsher, his whip striking for smaller mistakes, his eyes lingering on Malik as if he could smell rebellion in his blood. The food rations shrank again, and the beatings grew more frequent. Fear was their weapon, but Malik had begun to taste something stronger than fear. One evening, Sophia slipped to his side as they carried buckets of water. Her voice was barely audible. There are others. Not here, but in other camps. They whispered too. They say some have already fled into the jungle. Malik's heart thudded. Escape was more than a dream. It was a rumor carried like smoke, invisible but real. He looked at Sophia, at Kosel, at the hollow-eyed men and women around him. They were all broken in body but not in spirit. Yet. That night, as Malik lay awake on the hard ground, he stared at the sliver of moonlight cutting through the cracks in the roof. He thought of his mother calling him lion, of the boy who had been beaten to death, of Sophia risking scraps of food to keep him alive. The silence of the quarters no longer felt like a graveyard. It felt like the space before a storm, and Malik knew the storm was coming. The night was moonless, the air thick, as if holding its breath. Malik crouched in the shadows of the hut, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in his chest. Around him, Sophia Kosel and 3 others huddled in silence, their faces pale with both terror and determination. They had chosen this night because the guards had drunk themselves into a stupor after a feast in the master's house. The smell of roasted meat had carried across the fields earlier, mocking the starving slaves, but tonight that indulgence became their chance. Malik whispered the plan one last time. We cross the fields, through the ditch, into the trees. We do not stop. We do not look back. Sophia clutched his hand tightly, her thin fingers trembling. If they catch us. They won't, Malik lied. His ribs still ached, his body weak, but his spirit burned hotter than ever. The group slipped into the night like shadows. Every step felt like a thunderclap in Malik's ears. The wet grass soaked their feet. The night insects buzzed. The distant snores of the guards mocked their desperation. For a moment, it felt possible. Freedom was just ahead, beyond the ditch, beyond the tree line. Malik's lungs ached, but he forced himself forward. Then came the sound. A single shout, harsh and guttural. A torch flared. Then another. Then the air split with the barking of orders. Run. Malik roared. His voice, silenced for so long, tore through the night with raw fury. The slaves scattered, their feet pounding the mud. The overseers stormed after them, their whips and rifles cracking through the darkness. Malik felt Sophia's hand ripped from his as they sprinted for the ditch. He heard the snap of gunfire, the scream of a man collapsing behind him. Kosel staggered, but Malik grabbed his arm and dragged him onward. The trees loomed ahead so close, so impossibly close. Then came the pain. A burning, searing fire tore through Malik's side. He stumbled, his knees buckling, but he forced himself back up, blood soaking his shirt. Sophia screamed his name, but Malik waved her forward. Go. Don't stop. He shouted, his voice breaking. She hesitated, her eyes wide with horror. Malik's gaze locked on hers, pleading, commanding. With a sob, she turned and vanished into the trees. Malik fell to his knees, his breath ragged, his body collapsing under the weight of blood and pain. Around him, the chaos of shouts and gunfire raged, but he felt strangely calm. The stars, faint above the smoke of torches, seemed to blur. Kosal crouched beside him, clutching his arm, tears streaking his dirt-caked face. "Don't do this, boy. Don't leave me." Malik forced a weak smile. "You said whispers can kill? Maybe they can also save." His bloodied hand reached out, gripping Kosal's tightly. "Live. Carry it forward. Tell them we did not die on our knees." The overseers closed in, their torches casting long, cruel shadows. Malik lifted his head and looked at them not with fear, but with defiance. Even broken, even bleeding, he refused to bow. A whip cracked through the air, but Malik did not flinch. His last breath came as a whisper, fierce and unyielding, "Lion." And then there was silence. In the distance, deep in the trees, Sophia's sobs faded into the night. Somewhere a spark of rebellion had survived. Malik's body fell in chains, but his spirit had slipped free, carried by the whispers that would outlive them all.